everyone from Istanbul School. Dear viewers, our guest this week is Professor Şaban Ali Düzgün. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
So there are definitions such as the eclipse of a god and the silence of God. I want to talk about these. Is this our judgment, or does such a thing really exist? In other words, what we call God is closer to us than the jugular vein as we know it. But how can we think that God is in such silence? How do you interpret this situation?
I wish such a definition did not exist in philosophy or theology, but this is a judgment. So there is no such thing. God is not silent. From the moment we believed, it entered our world silently in a way we did not realize. Therefore, the moment He says He is closer to us than our jugular vein, the moment you give Him that trust, that approval, the moment you open your heart and mind, He enters your world. We may be experiencing such events together with you that we will talk about today. We are adding another judgment to it. In other words, we have faith. There is the idea of an entity that is closer than our jugular vein, that is the closest ear to us, that hears us and supports us in every stressful, troubled, and depressive moment. We trusted and approved this so much that when some events occurred after that, it is as if God is silent, as if God is kept. Just as there is no heat or light during a solar eclipse, there actually is. So there is no heat and light, but there is sun. But the sun that exists has no existence. It doesn't benefit you. You need its warmth and light. Therefore, there is God. This is not a thought that denies God. God exists, but why doesn't He listen to us? Why doesn't He save us? Why doesn't He help us? In this case, is God eclipsed like a sun? Or do we sense that God is there, sees us, looks at us, but does not intervene in any way? There are historical experiences and collective human struggles that give rise to this feeling of abandonment and disconnection. Now, Ingmar Bergman has a movie called Winter Light. As far as I remember, it's a movie from the 1960s, possibly 1963. It tells the story of a priest who goes completely into this theological questioning, confronting the harsh reality of human despair and the seeming absence of divine support. The film vividly portrays people committing suicide, their lives feeling utterly meaningless, and the priest's own existential crisis is a reflection of this broader struggle. While doing this questioning, we actually internalize this beyond being a mere judgment. And if we say this from the perspective of Christianity, for example, Jesus' suffering on the cross takes on a deeper significance. I'm talking about the suffering of Jesus from a Catholic perspective, because it is a suffering when He is crucified. The cross caused severe torment to His biology, physique, and body, and ultimately killed Him. But there is something else that they draw attention to, something the movie underlines with poignant emphasis. The real suffering of Jesus was not just the intense physical agony, but the profound sense of spiritual abandonment. Why didn't God answer Him? Why did He experience such a sense of forsakenness? The last words of Jesus on the cross in the Christian tradition, my God, why have you forsaken me?" encapsulate this deep anguish of feeling utterly alone in suffering, reflecting a divine silence that echoes through the ages. Why did you leave me? Now, this is a breaking moment in the Christian tradition. This is Secondly, Martin Buber, who was caught by God while the Jewish genocide was taking place in the Holocaust, says the same thing, speaking from the perspective of Jewish theology. Why is God silent while so many people are being taken to the gas chambers? It does not open up a debate about whether God exists or not. God exists, but why was He kept?
Maybe we can say the same sentences today. Why is God silent while babies are dying in Palestine?
That's right. So here, dear Fatma, I think that what we should not do while having these discussions, religious discussions, is not to sweep the issue under the rug. We will reveal the problem openly and transparently. We will express this. The same thing today people ask implicitly or explicitly. Why is God silent when babies are dying and thousands of people are being murdered there? Again, there is no question of God's existence or non-existence. Why silent? I gave my judgment. This is a judgment, a human judgment. God is not silent, but man thinks He is silent. Let me give you another example. a more familiar example to us. After the prophet receives revelation, a period called the interregnum comes, that is, the revelation is stopped. Now, after the revelation stopped, there are rumors that the prophet experienced a great depression, something similar, when he sees himself being abandoned. What did we say? The Jews abandoned us during the Holocaust, God says. On the cross, Jesus says, "Why have you abandoned me?" As we understand what the prophet thought from Surah Duha. He says, "Your Lord has not abandoned you." Now, what is in the prophet's mind? There is at least some anxiety and doubt that his Lord has abandoned him, even if it's not a clear idea. Was there such a thing? Your Lord, it was said, has not abandoned you. So you're in a place somewhere where God suffocates and remains silent about everything that happens. We know this. You are watching us from there, but you are not involved in any way. Your judgment is a human judgment and a justified judgment. So people are right to think this judgment. They think, but this is just a judgment. This is not reality. Why isn't it real? It's not real like that. Here's my analysis. God intervenes in the events by instilling in people the feeling of anger in the face of such events and the feeling of compassion for the suffering person. In other words, when we think that God remains silent, His voice becomes louder. So we see today, when people all over the world, civilians and politicians, stand up and curse what is happening in Palestine, see what the Zionist mind and Zionist body has done to those poor people, and raise their voices, the voice that rises is the voice of God. It is simply the divine manifestation and manifestation of the anger He placed within us and the mercy He placed within us. Now you will say, "Sir, this is a bit of a strange statement." This is a real statement. Because when humans intervene in history and such events, the course of events changes. When you change something, the verse says a person, when he takes all the initiatives towards what exists and changes something, God also changes what is in himself, what exists, not necessarily the world of emotion or the world of thought. So we call our itina sira mustaqim. For example, it guides us to the right path. If the demand goes from us, there will be a response. If there is no demand, there is no reward. So here we are. When the prophet Job was sick and in trouble, he felt and said the same thing. But we ultimately see that this is not the case. The prophet thought he was abandoned. We see from the verses that he was not abandoned. So, for example, it affected me a lot. That means the prophet is not heard of. They have problems, accusations that the revelation has been interrupted, and it seems to him that he has gone crazy. So that's what happened. There is a depressive state that all those accusations have pushed him into, and while he says he is not heard, now has. The prophet is described as a person of goodwill in the Holy Quran. In other words, the prophet transforms from a person who says, "Allah does not hear me," to a being who hears everyone. Prophet. So, as a human being, the prophet himself transforms into what he demands from the divine. What did he want from God? He wanted him to hear it. What happened to him? It became the voice of the strange people, the invisible bodies and people who needed to be heard. He started to hear them. This means that we have a duty to embody the things we demand from God in our own world and to open a space for them. That's why I said this here. The moment we believe in Allah and trust Him, we open the doors of our world to Him, and He silently enters our world. There is no such thing as silence anymore. He is like us. In this ontological sense, He is a God-human analogy. Hulul, I never open such a philosophical or theological discussion. Not that. That's not it. Sooner or later, a person realizes that the things he asks from God are actually demanded from himself, and that he realizes this in the process. What is happening in this history, what is happening in society, what we request from God when we say, "Why don't you intervene, Lord?" There is actually a voice there in the silence, that it is an echo, a voice that returns to us. making us realize that we are the ones who will make that intervention. Therefore, the story of Prophet Job is not told in vain, as in the process we learn how that complaint about not being heard about the abandonment of the Prophet in Surah Duha later turned into a body that actively listens, produces solutions, is the voice of unheard voices, watches over the eyes of unseen bodies, an eye that observes rather than spies, a body that shows care. There is no right beginning. In other words, the Prophet's feeling of him as a human being, voicing that complaint, feeling it, feeling abandoned, is the moment that brings the Prophet closest to me as a human being. The more the Prophet resembles me, the more he is from me. Therefore, the Prophet's internalization of those troubles is how I feel when I experience the same troubles today. If the Prophet addressed this, he says, remember, we are you without direction. You don't know which way to go. We found him to be such a person. We found you as a person in need of things, but then we educated and raised you as a person who is independent of everything and does not feel the need for anything. Then we understand that a person who judges God's silence then enters a process of education. After coming to this conclusion, how can I make the divine dominate the earth? God's will, what he wants, his goodness, his kindness, his mercy, because there is a danger here. I say this by taking into consideration the relationship Carl Schmitt established between God and violence, between monotheism and violence, because it is dangerous. When we say this, we are sailing on the waters. When we say making God's will dominant on earth, this may even be a will that can evolve into violence. But we say this from the beginning. Within the idea of God, we can see mercy, completeness, perfection, equality, freedom, seeing all people as one as required by monotheism, accepting them as free from racism, marginalization, and alienation with an ethical judgment given to us by being descended from the same parents. In other words, the ideal of the utopia of a society of consent. I'm talking about a being who tells and predicts. When we talk about such a being, I understand that when we say, "Oh Lord, why are you silent? Why don't you intervene? I know you are there somewhere, you are watching." It means that I started that process as an active individual at that very moment. Read Surah Duha, the story of the prophets, with this perspective. Is how in 23 years the Prophet acted as the active agent of this purpose, how he transformed a society which the Holy Quran describes as being on the edge of the cliff, fighting, eating each other from the edge of the cliff and turning it into people who established a civilization. You will see that it brings peace and tranquility. At the same time, his utopia, I always say that I wish we had a utopia, our utopia, as Vaisi expressed in Havna Mesi, like Namik Kemal's and Zia Pasha's dream utopias, Mustafa Nazim's Erzurumlu Mustafa. If we had a utopia like Nazim's progress in his dream, what kind of a society, what kind of a fair, egalitarian, libertarian terms that organize the relations between people would prevail. If we put these in front of us, we would see that the things we expect from God are also expected by God for us. So we see that He is praying and calling to us as much as we are praying to Him.
Yes, we are always waiting, sir. When we look at it, our image of God is always so far away. Apart from that, we as humans are always in expectation. Why are you silent? Why don't you help? We always have expectations from God, but we leave aside that He also has expectations from us and that we have responsibilities on our own behalf.
You said this very well. So this life is human life. If He establishes it, it is there. If He does not do it, it is not. Man has the expression children of God in Christianity. We call him as the Caliph of Allah in the Holy Quran, Halifatullahi fil art, the Caliph of Allah on earth. In a sense, the Caliph is a journeyman there. the project manager. So if you do it, such a life will be established here. If you do not, it will not be established. In other words, in a world created by people with will, we will either sit down and carry out a project ourselves about the purposes for which that will is directed, or the divine will tell us what purpose the being he created, directed, guided, guides, shows the way to, and places here equipped with equipment is walking towards. I'm so sorry, it seems that humanity is sitting around and building a better world where we, as humanity, will never come to such a situation where no one complains about anyone and, oh God, why are you silent? Why are you there somewhere? But why don't you reach out to us to save us from these troubles? There are calls for him to a just world, Dar es Salaam. Look, the Arabic word for Jerusalem is Dar es Salaam. That means the land of peace. Jerusalem means land of peace. Is it a land of peace? In other words, in the book of Allah, Allah says that a being who is the planner, creator, sustainer of the earth, who has everything, and all the prophets should turn this place into a land of peace. A place whose surroundings were said to be blessed and fertile has been turned into the center of fight, noise, and chaos for centuries by the hands of believers, Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Is it true? True. Now, as believers, we are here crying and aching. On the other hand, non-believers, others say, that this is the world this religious order has created. It is chaos, fight, war. So if you look at the Gospel of John, in the Gospel of John, here are the bridals of the people who entered Jerusalem with their horses. There are passages stating that the horses will be covered in blood, that is, their horses' chins and bits will be stained with the blood of the people they killed. He makes future projections, including end-of-the-world prophecies. Now I'm talking about a book that codes the end of the world into fights, noise, and conflict from John. Now, where is brotherhood? Where is unity? Where is order? Therefore, people who do not believe this, atheists, religions, are the reason for the conflict and noise, brother. First of all, we need to show historical examples that show that we destroyed the ground. We need to show this will as humans. Then let this right arise. Oh Lord, where are you? So where are you people? I mean, Jews. For God's sake, dear Fatma, where were you, O Lord, when 6 million Jews were slaughtered in the Holocaust while Martin Buber was writing this? Are we saying the same thing now? We say, I can easily say that this is what was going through a Muslim's mind when Jews were slaughtering Muslims. Where are you, O Lord, when these babies are being killed? We understand that there is no chosen people or chosen nation of God here because the Jews say so. We are the chosen nation, elected nation number 6 million. We don't get hung up on 6 million, 5 million, 3 million numbers, but we know that hundreds of thousands of people were killed in Nazi camps and gas chambers. What happened to God's chosen people? The same thing is happening today. So such times of disaster alternate among people. Then we need to ask, what should I do to avoid my turn? Now let's make a very comfortable future projection. It is the circumcision of Prophet Joseph, observing current events and making projections of where they will evolve. Future projection. The next potential catastrophe or massacre could be directed at Jewish communities, whether they are in Israel or scattered across different countries. This projection is based on historical patterns of oppression and conflict. Why might this happen? Because of their continuing oppression and the cycles of violence that have historically targeted them. There is a verse that suggests, if you turn against us, we will turn against you. This idea reflects a belief in a form of divine retribution or cosmic justice, where acts of oppression and injustice eventually lead to consequences. The anticipation of such events is not merely a prediction, but a warning derived from historical and theological perspectives.
So it's their turn.
Well, history is like this. The Holy Quran calls it a very bad cycle. The fault is that very bad examples are constantly mentioned in this way.
So are these used in our education?
We are trained with these, but people do not learn by constantly experiencing. You don't learn by constantly experiencing. Learning from the mistakes of others is the wisest and most appropriate way of wisdom. That's why history is told. This is why stories are told. Now, what he calls evil examples are bad examples that keep coming back. You become part of a cycle. Learn from this. Take a lesson, take a lesson. The Jew will also learn a lesson. Muslims will also learn a lesson, Christians and others. But the lesson was not learned. Therefore, I believe that saying, "Oh God, where are you? Why are you silent? Are you held like a sun? Why don't you give us warmth and light?" means that people who are so insensitive, so unconscious, who have not been the subject of history, who are dragged away in front of the flowing history, have no right to such a reproach. I'm saying there is no reality. And that is God who placed this anger and mercy in us, that is, anger against the oppressors and mercy towards the oppressed, is already in the events. What is it for you and us as humans to do with that anger and mercy? Are we playing our part? Let's look at ourselves first. We have no right to ask anything from him. That's okay, but unfortunately when we look at these photos, we have to say that we do not have that right now.
So actually God is not silent, but we cannot hear him.
It is incredibly vocal, incredibly active within us. But we always do not throw the ball to the ball, always look for the perpetrator somewhere outside, always to third parties. With our habit of referencing, with our habit of transferring responsibility, we are now being punished with the penalty of not noticing it. What I am saying is that in the world we have created, the institutions we have established to solve the crisis, such as international institutions and the United Nations, are the source of the crisis. His inability to solve crises in the world stems from his prejudice against others and his immorality towards marginalization. That's why I always give examples. Kant, who had to become a moral philosopher during the times when immorality was at its peak, said this when he wrote a book of essays on eternal peace. In other words, when people make a peace agreement, they make that peace agreement with the concern of how to squeeze in items that will disrupt the peace. I'm afraid eternal peace will only be found in the grave, the man says. The question is, how can we learn from these disasters? All people will sit down and struggle for this. This is a real mental exercise that will tire your mind. Can be exited from here. Nearly 70 million people died in Europe in World War II. Today you can only notice the transition from one country to another by the signs on the road. There is neither a border gate nor a police officer stopping you. I mean, look, the 70 million people there who eat each other have turned Europe into a land of peace. Therefore, what kind of peace can there be in the Middle East? Christians, Jews and Muslims are aiming to see how Jerusalem can be turned into a holy, holy place, as the Holy Quran shows. That blessedness is not something that happened in the past. Everything that the Holy Quran mentions positively is a goal. It is not a lagging starting point. Therefore, they will sit down and think about how we can turn it into a holy place, the smart ones. So there are also Jewish protests all over the world. Jews are protesting against the Zionist mentality. Therefore, those men went downhill. Why shouldn't this blessing be reciprocated in a world where the voice of the people who are truly the people of Moses is heard? I hope and pray that you will find it.
I hope so, sir. We hope so too. I hope some awareness has been raised so that your valuable comments are appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I thank you. Dear audience, our guest this week is Prof. Dr. Şaban Ali Düzgün. We talked to him about our pain and God's silence. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.